Translator doesn't show up. So how did a 6-year-old autistic girl save the billionaire CEO's deal? Before we begin, comment below and tell us, where are you watching from? And when it's over, be sure to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The Translator didn't show up. A $200 million deal was minutes from collapse, and the only person who could save it was a 6-year-old autistic girl with a stuffed dragon in her arms. What no one expected. She didn't just speak their language, she saw through their hearts, and what she revealed next changed every life in that room forever. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, casting a pale reflection on the marble floors of the Henderson and Associates building. It was barely 8 a.m., but Margaret Chen was already sweating through her janitor's uniform as she pushed her cart across the spotless lobby. At 62, Margaret had learned how to become invisible, how to clean around people without ever disturbing their world. But today, the weight in her chest made it hard to breathe. Her phone pressed against her shoulder as she whispered, "Please, Mr. Rodriguez, I need you to watch Emma, just for a few hours. Something's happened at work." Silence, then a click. The line was dead. She stared at her phone, her heart plummeting. Her babysitter had called in sick. Her neighbor was away. Her backup plan had just vanished, and Emma, her 6-year-old daughter with autism, couldn't be left alone. Not even for 5 minutes. Margaret stepped into the elevator, her hands trembling. 32 floors up, a different kind of storm was brewing. She had overheard it last night while emptying trash bins on the executive floor. Yamamoto Industries, the Japanese tech giant, was considering a $200 million partnership. Everyone in the building knew if this deal failed, layoffs would start by Friday. When the elevator doors opened, it wasn't quiet corporate professionalism that greeted her. It was chaos. People in tailored suits barked into phones. Assistants ran down the hallway carrying trays of sushi and bottled water. And in the middle of it all stood Thomas Henderson, the billionaire CEO himself, his silver hair ruffled, his face pale. "No translator," he barked. An assistant nodded helplessly. "We've called every agency in Seattle. Nothing. Yamamoto's team arrives in 2 hours." Margaret kept her head down as she wheeled her cart toward the conference room. She'd never even spoken to Mr. Henderson directly. But this morning, he looked like a man unraveling. Her phone buzzed again. It was Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor. "Margaret, I'm so sorry, but Emma's been standing outside your apartment for over an hour. She's crying. I think she's scared." Before Margaret could reply, the screen went black. Dead battery. She stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. Emma needed her, but if she left now, she could lose this job, the only thing keeping a roof over their heads. From the corner of her eye, she saw Thomas Henderson slam his fist into the conference room table. "Cancel it. We'll reschedule." "Sir," his assistant said softly. "Yamamoto-san said this was their only opening. If we cancel, they're going with the Morrison group." A silence fell over the hallway like a curtain. Margaret could feel it, the weight of desperation, the kind that didn't care about rank or salary or spotless suits, the kind that stripped a man bare. And for the first time in 15 years, Margaret did something she had never done. She stepped forward. "Mr. Henderson," she said quietly. He turned, startled to hear his name from someone he didn't recognize. I overheard about the translator." She hesitated. Her fingers gripped the edge of her cart like a lifeline. "My daughter. She's only 6, but she speaks Japanese." His brow furrowed. "Ma'am, this is a $200 million negotiation. I know, and I know it sounds impossible, but she watches this anime series. She mimics the voices. Her therapist says it's a form of learning. She's gifted in ways I can't explain. He stared at her. Then, finally, how fast can you get her here? Margaret swallowed hard. 20 minutes. Chapter 1. The Woman No One Saw. The first thing you noticed about Margaret Chen wasn't her age or her uniform. It was how little space she took up in the world. She moved like someone who had spent years practicing how not to be seen sidestepping executives, wiping down desks without making eye contact, folding herself smaller inside crowded elevators. She had worked the 32nd floor for nearly a decade, knew the names on every door, could match executives to their trash who drank green juice, who ordered Thai takeout at midnight, who left lipstick-stained coffee mugs on mahogany tables, but no one knew her name. To them, she was just the janitor. To Emma, she was everything. Emma had been born 6 weeks early, fighting for breath from her first moment in the world. Doctors said she might never speak, might never make eye contact, might never lead an independent life. Margaret had stopped listening to doctors a long time ago, because Emma didn't just speak, she sang, not with melodies, but with the cadence of anime characters she'd memorized word for word. She didn't make eye contact, but she saw things adults missed, tiny emotional shifts, patterns in the way people moved, spoke, breathed. And even if the world didn't understand her daughter, Margaret did, completely. This morning, though Margaret was unraveling, she'd promised Emma they'd go to the park, promised she could bring her dragon, Akira, promised that after therapy they'd feed the ducks, and Emma, who built her whole world around routines and rules, had been waiting by the door since dawn, dressed in her unicorn dress, clutching her stuffed dragon like a lifeline. But when the call came in from her supervisor, all those promises shattered. We need you here. Margaret, first thing, Yamamoto meeting. You know what's at stake. So Margaret had come in early, wearing shame like an extra layer beneath her uniform. She'd left her daughter alone, breaking every routine that kept Emma grounded. Now, standing by the service closet, she felt her world crumbling. Her hands trembled as she wiped down the spotless conference table. The executives were scrambling. The translator had disappeared. The Japanese delegation was already en route, and at the center of it all was Thomas Henderson, CEO, billionaire, and the man who, despite his towering reputation, now looked like a threadbare version of himself. His voice cracked as he muttered into his phone, "Just find someone. Anyone." That's when Margaret made her decision. She crossed the room before her courage could evaporate. "Mr. Henderson," she said softly, throat dry. I think my daughter might be able to help." He looked up, confused. "I'm sorry. Who?" "My daughter," she repeated, voice steadier now. "She's 6. She has autism, but she speaks Japanese. Not from books. From anime. She mimics tone, emotion. She understands things I don't. I know this sounds insane." But before she could finish, Henderson raised a hand. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Not as an executive, looks at an employee, but as a man, looks at a human being he's never truly seen before. Something softened in his eyes. "Get her here," he said quietly. Pause, moment. She moved like someone who had spent years practicing how not to be seen. A single line, but every woman who's ever been overlooked feels it in her bones. As the elevator doors slid shut behind her, Margaret clutched her phone and whispered into the static, "Hold on, baby, just hold on. Mama's bringing you somewhere no one expected you to be." Chapter 2. When the world falls apart. It started with a flicker in the lights, just a small surge in the fluorescent panels overhead. But for a moment, it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Inside the executive boardroom, the mood was anything but steady. The $200 million meeting with Yamamoto Industries was less than 2 hours away, and the translator, the linchpin of the entire negotiation, was missing. Completely unreachable, not answering calls, emails, or even emergency texts. Thomas Henderson, usually the epitome of composure, was pacing like a man watching his legacy unravel. His silver tie was askew. His voice, usually commanding, now cracked under the weight of something heavier than failure. Public failure. "We're going to lose the deal," said Robert Mitchell, the CFO, dragging a trembling hand through his thinning hair. "They're not going to wait around for us to get our act together. Morrison Group is waiting in the wings." Linda Walsh, head of marketing, rubbed her temples. "Do you know what it took to even get Yamamoto to consider us over Morrison?" "I know exactly what it took," Henderson snapped. 2 years of negotiations, 8 trips to Tokyo, 6 dinners I barely remember. And now this undone by a no-show translator. Someone suggested calling another agency. "We've called every agency," snapped his assistant. "No one can get here in time." Not someone good enough for this. Silence fell again, and somewhere down the hall, a vacuum hummed a reminder that life, even during breakdowns, keeps going. Meanwhile, Margaret fumbled with her coat as she ran through the streets, one hand on her phone, the other gripping Emma's backpack. She'd barely explained anything to her daughter on the drive over. Just, "There's a big building and Mama needs your help. And yes, you can bring Akira." She'd repeated it like a prayer. Emma sat quietly in the back seat, tracing her fingers along the stitching on her dragon's tail. "When people shout, I don't like it," she said softly, not looking up. Margaret reached back and squeezed her tiny hand. "No one will shout at you, baby. I promise." But even as she said it, she knew she couldn't guarantee that. Not in a world that didn't understand Emma. Not in a room filled with polished shoes and polished egos. Back on the 32nd floor, Thomas Henderson stood alone in the conference room now, staring at the Tokyo skyline projected on the flat screen. He thought about all the things they'd prepared: pitch decks, market analysis, glossy folders, and how none of it mattered if they couldn't communicate. "Cancel it," he muttered. His assistant flinched. "Sir." "Call Tokyo, reschedule." But Yamamoto-san specifically said, "This is their only window. If we cancel, they're going with Morrison." That word again, Morrison, a name that felt like a blade every time it was uttered. Henderson sank into the nearest chair, running both hands down his face. He had spent 30 years building this company, suffered through recessions, betrayals, and boardroom mutinies, but now it would all fall apart because of one missed connection, one missing person. The silence in the room was suffocating until someone spoke. Not someone from the team, not from the board. It was Margaret Chen. "Mr. Henderson." He looked up, startled. She wasn't supposed to be in the room, and yet there she was, standing just inside the doorway with rain dripping from her coat. Eyes wide but steady. "My daughter," she said. She might be able to help. He had spent 30 years building a company, and it would all fall apart because no one saw the janitor. 20 minutes later, the elevator dinged softly. A little girl stepped out, wearing a unicorn dress and clutching a dragon with worn seams. Everyone stared, and no one, not even her mother, was ready for what would happen next. Chapter 3. A dragon in her pocket. Margaret walked quickly, her heels uneven against the tile, one hand holding her daughter's, and the other gripping a bag that felt heavier than it was. Emma walked beside her, small and composed, clutching a faded purple dragon with frayed wings and one missing button eye. Akira to Emma. He wasn't a toy. He was a translator of feelings, a protector of quiet moments, and a memory of every bedtime story ever whispered in the dark. Emma had refused 4 outfits that morning. Only the unicorn dress would do, the one with glittered sleeves and pockets deep enough to hide a mini notebook, earring, a crayon, and a folded drawing of a cherry blossom tree. "Why are we going to your work building?" she asked, her voice gentle but precise. "You said that was only for grown-ups." Margaret swallowed hard, unsure how much truth to give. "They need help, and I told them you might be able to understand something that no one else can." Emma looked up at the tall glass tower with a mixture of wonder and wariness. "Like when the hero is called into the strange world," she whispered, referencing one of her favorite stories, "and everything changes." Inside the elevator, Emma stood still, watching the numbers climb. Her fingers tightened on Akira's paw. She adjusted the dragon's position exactly 3 times before stepping into the 32nd floor hallway. Margaret had never brought her daughter here before. This was the floor where people didn't smile, where decisions worth millions were made between sips of imported coffee, where Margaret cleaned silently after everyone else had gone home. But now, here she was, walking beside a little girl with a dragon in her arms, and a mind full of words no one expected. Thomas Henderson stood near the glass wall, phone in hand, staring out at the skyline. His tie was off-center, his expression unreadable. When he turned and saw them, his reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Disappointment. Emma was too small, too young, too childlike. She was not the miracle he was hoping for, just a fragile girl in a unicorn dress and rain-damp shoes. "This is Emma," Margaret said, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "She's the one I told you about." Henderson looked down, struggling for a polite response, but Emma looked up at him without fear, without pretense, and studied his face like it was a puzzle she'd already begun solving. "You are Mr. Henderson," she said softly. "You're having a very hard day." He blinked. Yes, I suppose I am." Then Emma added, almost offhandedly, in flawless Japanese, "Your shoulders are tense, and your eyes are tired. That means your heart is tired, too." The room went still. Henderson's assistant dropped her pen. Margaret didn't breathe. Henderson knelt, slowly, like a man unsure whether he was standing before a child or a prophet. "Can you understand fast Japanese, like business Japanese?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Akira helps me when it's hard. He's from Japan. In my head, he tells me which words mean something else. Like when grown-ups say maybe, but mean no. Or when they say interesting, but mean I hate it." Margaret closed her eyes, bracing herself for disbelief, for dismissal. But Henderson stared at Emma with something else entirely. Not skepticism, hope. A moment later, "Some very important people from Japan are coming soon," Henderson said, "and we need to understand not just what they say, but what they mean." Emma tilted her head, her thinking gesture, like in my shows. Like when the detective watches faces to find out who's lying. "Exactly." She gave a small nod. "Then I'll try. But I need my dragon, and I need to sit where I can see everyone's faces, because words aren't always enough." Henderson looked at Margaret, then back at Emma. "You can have your dragon, and the best seat in the room." She wasn't just translating a language. She was decoding hearts. As the chairs were rearranged and the room reset, Henderson stood at the doorway and whispered to himself more prayer than strategy. "Please, God, let the child with the dragon be enough." Chapter 4. The language. She spoke alone. 30 minutes later, the boardroom looked different. Not because the room had changed, because she had. Emma sat at the far corner of the table. Her chair adjusted perfectly so her eyes could meet every face. On the table before her, a small notebook with unicorn stickers, a sharpened purple crayon, and neatly placed apple juice. And Akira the dragon positioned like a silent guardian. It looked like a child's tea party at the edge of a battlefield. Across the room, executives gathered like storm clouds, whispering and watching, unsure whether to be hopeful or horrified. "She's 6, muttered CFO Robert Mitchell, and she talks to a stuffed animal. "The dragon isn't imaginary," Emma said softly, not looking up. "He's just invisible to other people." Silence dropped over the room like snow. Thomas Henderson cleared his throat. "Emma has a gift," he said, his voice stronger now, "and right now, she's the only bridge we have." Margaret stood near the window, arms crossed tight over her chest. Her presence meant to comfort her daughter, but also herself. She'd spent most of her life cleaning other people's legacies. Now her daughter might be writing one. The door opened. 3 men entered. Perfect suits, crisp bows, faces calm but unreadable. Yamamoto Hiroshi, CEO of Yamamoto Industries, silver hair, steady eyes, and the kind of presence that silences a room without a word. Beside him, his son Kenji, younger but sharper eyes like scalpels, and their CFO, Tanaka, known for his silence and precision. Henderson bowed. "Welcome. Thank you for coming." Yamamoto returned the bow. "We have looked forward to this meeting for many weeks." Then he saw Emma, the smallest person in the room, but the one sitting as if the chair had always been hers. She stood and bowed deep. Respectful, precise, "Yamamoto-sama," she said in Japanese, her voice clear and confident. "Watashi wa Emma desu. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu." A flicker of surprise crossed Yamamoto's face. Then, delight. He responded in Japanese fast, fluid, filled with nuance. "A test," Emma answered, her tone shifting to match his. She wasn't translating. She was mirroring, reflecting, matching cadence, emotion, rhythm. Yamamoto chuckled softly and turned to his son. Speaking in Japanese, Emma tilted her head, listening. He told him, she translated calmly, that this is already more interesting than he expected, and that children are sometimes gifts. Adults forget to unwrap. Gasps echoed around the room. Thomas Henderson felt his pulse change. This wasn't translation. This was poetry, precision, interpretation. As the conversation deepened, Emma did what no professional had ever done in this room. She listened with her whole self. She told them when someone said we understand, but meant we're uncertain. When they said interesting, but really meant we're not impressed. When Yamamoto joked about American coffee being too aggressive, Emma smiled and added, "He made a funny face when he said it. So I think he likes it. But he wants you to know Japanese people prefer gentle things." They laughed. Genuinely, something broke open in the room. And for the first time in days, Henderson breathed. But then Tanaka, the CFO, leaned forward and began speaking rapidly in Japanese numbers, forecasts, cash flow projections. Everyone stiffened. This was the hard part. Emma frowned slightly, brows furrowed, her fingers brushing Akira's paw. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them and spoke. He says, "Your company is like a strong tree," but he's worried. Strong trees need deep roots. He thinks your roots, your money, your leadership, your culture are okay, but not deep enough yet. She looked up at Henderson. He says, with his company's help, you could grow a forest, but forests take time and patience and people who won't cut them down when they don't grow fast enough. No one spoke because she hadn't just translated his words. She had translated his warning and his hope. She looked up at the CEO of a $1 million company and said, "He thinks you're a tree, but he needs you to become a forest." Yamamoto turned to Emma and asked, "Do you know why we really came here?" Emma paused, listening, then turned to Henderson with wide, wondering eyes. He says, he's not just here to invest in your business. He's here to see what kind of person you are. Chapter 5. When a child speaks the truth, you could hear the sound of a pencil drop. No one expected to feel reverence in a business meeting, and yet here they were, executives, lawyers, analysts leaning forward, not to speak, but to understand. Because the smallest person in the room was saying things no one else dared to say. Yamamoto had asked the question without pretense. Do you know why we really came here? And Emma, just 6 years old, eyes wide and voice steady, had answered. He wants to know what kind of person you are, not what kind of pitch Henderson had prepared, not how many zeros were on the balance sheet, but whether the man at the head of the table could be trusted with more than money. Emma took a slow sip of her apple juice. He says, 5 years ago, his company tried to work with another American firm, but they lied about profits, about performance. She paused, and for the first time, looked directly at Henderson. He says, people usually lie about money because they're scared. But being scared is okay. Lying is not. Henderson's breath caught. He felt every gaze in the room shift toward him. Emma wasn't accusing. She was inviting. Do you always tell the truth? She asked gently. Not as a trap, as a test. Margaret felt her stomach twist. She had cleaned this man's office for 15 years, but had never seen him like this, shoulders hunched, lips trembling, eyes haunted by decisions made long ago. He rose slowly, looked at Yamamoto, then looked at Emma. We had hard years, he said. We nearly lost everything. We made mistakes. We cut too deep. But we didn't lie. We told the truth, even when it cost us investors. Emma translated, then waited. Yamamoto's expression didn't change right away. He reached for his tea, sipped quietly. Then a smile, subtle, genuine. He says, Emma whispered, that honesty is the most expensive gift you can give someone. She paused, a soft wonder entering her voice. But it's also the only gift that makes you richer when you give it away. A few moments later, the room was lighter. The tone shifted. Even the CFO, who had crossed his arms at the beginning of the meeting, now sat with his hands open on the table. That's when Yamamoto leaned forward again, closer this time. He spoke with a different tone, slower, more personal. Emma listened carefully, her eyes blinking slowly as she processed. He says, business isn't just about numbers. It's about people and how you treat the people who can't do anything for you. That's what tells him who you are. Emma paused, then pointed to Margaret. He says, you never really saw my mama, even though she's cleaned your office for 15 years. Henderson looked like he'd been struck. Emma wasn't angry. She was just clear. But he also says that today you listened, that you're learning, and that's what matters. The people at the top, forget the ones who hold the ladder steady. Yamamoto stood. He walked to Margaret slowly, as if approaching someone sacred. Then he bowed to her with the same reverence he'd shown Henderson. Mrs. Chen, he said in careful English, you have raised someone extraordinary. Margaret's voice trembled. She saved me before she ever saved anyone else. As Yamamoto returned to his seat, he looked at Henderson and spoke one final line in Japanese. Emma translated, now I know the truth about your company, about your people, about your heart. And with that, the deal shifted from contract to connection. Chapter 6. The Fall of Morrison. For a long moment, no one spoke. Not Henderson, not Margaret, not even Yamamoto. Only Emma, gently stroking the worn fabric of her dragon, Akira. Her head tilted as if hearing a frequency no one else could. Then Yamamoto said something in Japanese. His voice quieter now, almost hesitant. Emma's brow furrowed. He says, he's seen me before. Margaret stepped closer. alarm blooming in her chest. What do you mean? Baby. Emma looked down at her notebook, then up at Yamamoto. I don't remember, she whispered. But he says, there's a video of me from 6 months ago. The room leaned in. Yamamoto opened a sleek black tablet, tapped a few buttons, and turned the screen around. There it was. A grainy video, a boardroom that looked different. But a child, Emma sat at a polished table, her dragon in her lap, calmly translating between two companies. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. I thought that was a fever dream, she murmured. 6 months ago, Emma had been sick, rambling about a meeting and helping people with numbers and feelings. No one had believed her. Not the doctors, not the therapist, not even Margaret. But it hadn't been a dream. It was real. Yamamoto spoke again. Emma translated. He says, that was the Morrison group. The deal you almost lost today was offered to them first. Everyone froze. But after Emma helped save the meeting, the Morrison CEO told her she was just a circus act. That they didn't need freaks playing translator. Margaret gasped. Henderson stood suddenly, fists clenched. Emma continued, her voice flat, detached. He says he canceled the deal that night because how someone treats a child who helps them shows you everything about their soul. Yamamoto's voice hardened in Japanese. Emma listened, then translated. He says, Morrison had smart minds, but no heart. And just like that, the boardroom that had once envied Morrison now saw them clearly, not as competition, as caution. A company with polished presentations but broken values. Henderson sank back into his chair. He looked at Emma. This child, who had saved 2 companies without ever meaning to. I should have known, he whispered, about Morrison, about you, about all the people I didn't see. Emma blinked slowly. You see now, she said, and that's what matters. She thought it was just a fever dream, but it was the moment that changed everything. As Yamamoto gently slid the tablet away, he looked across the table at Henderson and said one final thing. Emma translated, sometimes we offer the biggest deals, not to find business partners, but to find people who deserve family. And no one, not even Margaret, understood how literal that would soon become. Chapter 7. Her sister's face. Yamamoto's voice shifted again, softer now, personal, like he was stepping away from business and into something more fragile. He spoke directly to Emma in Japanese, and for the first time that morning, Emma hesitated. She clutched Akira closer, then looked at her mother. Mama, she whispered, he's saying something strange. Margaret knelt beside her. What is it, baby? Emma blinked. Her voice shook slightly. He says, I have a sister. The room stilled. Margaret's face drained of color. Her heart stumbled in her chest. What? Emma turned back to Yamamoto, asked a few careful questions in Japanese, then turned back, slowly, like she was piecing together something too big for a child to hold. He says, his granddaughter is named Yuki. She's 8. She lives in Japan. A pause. She doesn't talk much. She stopped talking after her mom died, and she's different, like me. Margaret's mouth parted, but no sound came. He says, her mother's name was Maria Chen. The words landed like thunder. Maria, Margaret's little sister, the one who left home at 19 and never came back. The one who had sent a few letters, then silence. The one Margaret thought had died alone in a car crash nearly a decade ago. She reached for the table to steady herself. Yamamoto pulled a small envelope from his briefcase. Inside was a photograph, old, faded, folded at the corners. A woman in a nurse's uniform, dark hair pulled back, gentle eyes. Maria. Margaret trembled as she stared down at the photo. Her baby sister, alive in this child. she whispered. I never knew. She had a daughter. Yamamoto spoke again. Emma translated. He says after Maria died, her husband, Yamamoto's son, tried to raise Yuki alone, but grief broke him. So Yuki came to live with her grandfather. Margaret covered her mouth with both hands. Tears ran silently down her cheeks. Then Yamamoto did something no one expected. He started a video call. A child's face filled the screen. Dark hair, wide eyes, and something else, a tilt of the head. A softness that looked achingly familiar. Emma gasped. That's her, she whispered. That's Yuki. Yuki's eyes lit up on screen. In carefully practiced English, she said. Emma-chan, I see you on the computer. You help me be brave. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, then burst into tears. Yamamoto spoke again, and Emma translated in halting words. He says, when Yuki saw the video of me helping with the business meeting, she smiled for the first time in months. She told him, that girl understands. That girl is my sister. Margaret leaned toward the screen, voice trembling. She's not wrong. Emma turned to her mom. Does this mean I really do have a sister? Margaret smiled through her tears, cupping her daughter's face. No, sweetheart, you have two sisters now, one in heaven and one waiting to meet you. Family doesn't always arrive the way we expect it. Sometimes they show up on a glowing screen with a shy smile and the same eyes as someone you once lost. As the video call ended, Yamamoto looked at Margaret and Emma and said in solemn English, family is not only who we are born from, it is who we choose to love. Then he asked the question that changed their lives. Would you like to be Yuki's American family? And in that moment, a janitor, a child, and a CEO all learned love is the most powerful kind of legacy. Chapter 8. The Deal of the Heart. For a while, no one spoke. Emma sat quietly beside Margaret, still wiping tears from her cheeks. The iPad with Yuki's face had gone dark, but something in the room had stayed open raw, honest, and warm. It felt human. Thomas Henderson stood at the window, arms folded. He had just watched a child translate her family history in real time, watched a woman he'd never truly noticed be reunited with a piece of her soul. And all because of a business meeting he almost canceled. When he finally turned around, his voice had changed, softer, lower, but stronger. Let's stop pretending this is just about money. Yamamoto nodded. He responded in Japanese. Emma translated, her voice steady now, as if a fire had lit inside her. He says the deal can still happen, but first, he needs to ask a final question. Henderson braced himself. He wants to know what kind of leader you want to be. Margaret looked up. Everyone else looked down, because they knew exactly what kind of leader Henderson had been. One who built a billion-dollar empire. One who didn't see the woman who cleaned his office. One who almost lost everything because he forgot that people aren't numbers. And now, he had a chance to choose again. He walked to Emma, knelt beside her chair, looked her in the eyes, not as a CEO, but as a man who had been humbled. Please tell Yamamoto-san, I want to build something that lasts, not just on paper, not just in revenue, but in people. Tell him I want my employees' families to thrive. I want the children of janitors to feel like they belong at the same table as the children of executives. Emma nodded. She translated. Yamamoto listened, then smiled. Emma continued. He says, then he will invest not just money, but himself, his legacy, his name, his heart. An hour later, the contracts had been signed, but they weren't the real agreement. The real deal had already happened when Henderson looked at Margaret and said, starting Monday, you're not our janitor. You're our director of family services. And Emma, you'll always have a place in this company, not just because you're brilliant, but because you see what the rest of us miss. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Emma blinked, stunned. I have a job, she whispered. You have a voice, Henderson said, and we're going to build a whole foundation around it. He invested more than capital that day. He invested in kindness. As the new partnership was announced to the room, Henderson looked around at his executives, the ones who once doubted Emma, and said quietly, she wasn't just the translator for this deal. She was the deal, and no one disagreed, because everyone knew. The company had just been saved by the heart of a 6-year-old girl holding a dragon. Chapter 9. Letters I never sent. The apartment hadn't changed. Same modest furniture. Same secondhand couch with floral patterns faded by years of use. But the energy inside it was different now. Yuki was coming tomorrow. Not on a screen. Not as a distant memory of someone else's child. But in real life, on a plane, with a suitcase, a dragon of her own, and a heart ready to meet the family she'd never known. And Margaret didn't know how to feel. She sat at the kitchen table, her reading glasses fogged from tears. Around her were letters she had never mailed, ones she had written to Maria over the years on birthdays, on quiet nights, on anniversaries, of nothing in particular. Most began the same way. I don't know where you are, but I wish you'd come home. Now she knew Maria had never come home because she couldn't. She had died with a daughter no one knew existed. And now that daughter was coming to live with her. Margaret didn't feel ready, but she also didn't feel afraid. Because 2 weeks ago, a little girl had walked into a boardroom with a dragon in her arms and reminded everyone what love looked like when you didn't wait for permission. Emma walked in quietly, barefoot in her unicorn pajamas. She climbed into Margaret's lap like she used to when she was 4 and still afraid of the dark. Are you thinking about Aunt Maria? Margaret nodded. I keep wondering what she'd say if she could see us now. Emma leaned her head against her mother's chest. I think she'd say, thank you for loving my girl like your own. Margaret smiled through tears. She already is my own. The next morning, they stood at the airport gate with a handmade sign that read, Welcome home, Yuki. Emma had drawn tiny cherry blossoms on the corners. When the arrival doors opened, Yuki stepped out smaller than expected, but braver somehow. She wore a lavender dress and carried a fox plushie. Her eyes scanned the crowd, cautious until she saw Emma, and then she ran, not with hesitation, not with fear, with recognition, as if something deep in her DNA whispered, there, that one, that's the sister I dreamed about. They collided in a tangle of limbs and laughter. Akira and the fox pressed between them like old friends. Margaret stood still, hand to her heart, trying to breathe. This was grief and grace holding hands. That night, Margaret tucked both girls into bed, 2 little bodies under one blanket, giggling in Japanese and English, and some language they'd invented between them. She turned off the light, but before she could leave, Emma whispered, Mama. Yes. Can we write her a letter? Aunt Maria, just in case she can still hear us. Margaret nodded, sitting back down. Emma handed her the notebook, and so she wrote, Dear Maria, you once told me you didn't belong anywhere, but your daughter belongs here. She laughs like you. She stares at the sky like you used to when we were girls. You would be so proud of her. I was angry when you left, not because you left me, but because you left before I could say goodbye. So, this is me saying hello instead. Your girls are safe now, and they're changing the world in ways we never imagined. I love you. Margaret. She folded the letter, slid it into the drawer next to the other ones. But this one was different. This one had an ending. She had spent so many years mourning a goodbye. She never imagined she'd be gifted a beginning instead. As Margaret turned off the hall light and headed to bed, she glanced back at the room. Two sisters asleep, curled toward each other like mirrored stars. And for the first time in decades, she felt it. Not just peace, but the quiet, powerful ache of being seen and forgiven. Chapter 10. The Girl Who Changed the World. The view from the 32nd floor hadn't changed. Seattle still stretched wide beyond the glass. Ferries drifted across the bay. Traffic pulsed below like a nervous heartbeat. But inside the office, everything was different. Emma sat at a long table beside Yuki, each girl with a tablet in hand and matching t-shirts that read, "Different is beautiful." Today's meeting was with a Korean tech firm struggling to understand why their American expansion was failing. The numbers made sense. The strategy was sound, but the people weren't connecting. So they called her Emma Chen Yamamoto, Chief Cultural Ambassador, 6 years old. She listened quietly as the execs talked over one another. Then, without looking up from her drawing of a cherry blossom tree, she said softly, "He's not mad at the timeline. He's mad because no one listened to what mattered to him." The room fell still. Emma lifted her head and met the executive's eyes across the screen. "You wanted to make something that lasts, didn't you?" But they only heard the deadlines. The Korean businessman blinked twice, then smiled. He nodded. Yuki squeezed Emma's hand under the table. They had done it again. Back in the hallway, Henderson leaned against the glass and watched them. Not just the girls, but the movement. Since that stormy day 6 months ago, the Emma and Yuki Institute for Neurodivergent Innovation had trained over 100 educators. A dozen corporations had signed the Different Brains, Stronger Teams pledge. And Margaret, she had helped launch family outreach programs in 6 cities, quietly changing lives, just like she always had. But what humbled Henderson most? The ripple effect. Just last week, a mother in Argentina sent a letter. "My daughter doesn't speak much, but after watching Emma's video, she picked up a crayon and wrote her first word, dragon." And a school principal in Ohio. We stopped trying to fix our students. We started learning from them instead. At the heart of it all, a little girl with a stuffed dragon and a voice soft as silk. That afternoon, Margaret stood in the doorway of Emma's new office glass walls. A beanbag chair, a reading nook filled with Japanese books and sensory toys. "I brought snacks," she said, holding up a lunchbox. Emma looked up and smiled. "Thanks, Mama." Akira was getting hungry. Yuki giggled. "He eats carrots now." Emma nodded. "Only when we do something brave." Margaret laughed softly. "Then he must be full all the time." Later that evening, they gathered for a small ceremony. Yamamoto joined by video call. His voice cracked as he addressed them. "I came to America for a business deal. I found my granddaughter's heart and a second family I didn't know I needed." Then he unveiled the Institute's mission statement, written in Emma's own words. "Every brain is different. That's not a problem. That's a plan. When we build things with different kinds of smart, we make the world stronger. Being different is a gift, and kindness is the language everyone understands." She hadn't just changed a meeting or a company. She had changed the way the world sees children like her. Ending hook for Chapter 10. As they turned off the lights in the boardroom that night, Emma stood by the window and whispered, "Mama, remember when you said I couldn't come to your work?" Margaret smiled. "I remember." Emma held Akira close, her voice a soft hum beneath the night. "I think this is my work now." And it was because the girl they once called different had become the voice everyone wanted to understand. The world outside looked the same, but inside Thomas Henderson, everything had shifted. 6 months ago, he was chasing a deal. Today, he was guarding a mission. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk. Emma and Yuki, standing in front of the foundation building, each holding their stuffed animals like symbols of strength. Below the photo, a plaque read, "When you teach the world to see people differently, you change more than companies. You change hearts." He turned toward the hallway. Margaret's office light was still on. Her door cracked open, a reminder that no one is ever just a janitor. And further down, laughter echoed from the conference room. Emma and Yuki practicing their keynote speech for a global education summit. Not because someone told them they could, because someone finally believed they already could. And that's the thing about love. It rarely shows up wearing name tags or carrying resumes. Sometimes it comes in the form of a 6-year-old girl clutching a dragon, translating not just words, but humanity. Tell us, what are your thoughts on this story? Leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Click here to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story that just might change the way you see the world. Watch our latest stories and don't miss out. Click here to watch more now, because sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with a girl the world almost didn't see.